Greetings, folks. Nice to see you again. My name is Dustin Cormier, and welcome to How to Rock Astrology. Today we're going to be continuing our lessons of Light on Life, an introduction to the Astrology of India by Robert E. Svodoba and Hart de Fouw. Today we're going to be talking about planetary strengths. In particular, I'm going to break this particular lesson down into probably 3 or 4 or 5 little episodes. And we're going to be starting the first one with Exaltation and Debilitation. So this following table shows the strength of the planets based on exaltation and debilitation. So we see the sun is exalted in Aries. Its exact exaltation degree is 10 degrees. And it's debilitated in Libra at 10 degrees of Libra. The moon is exalted in Taurus at 3 degrees of Taurus. And the moon is exalted at 3 degrees of Scorpio. Debilitated at 3 degrees of Scorpio. See, Mars is exalted in Capricorn at 28 degrees. It's debilitated in Cancer at 28 degrees. Let's say a little bit about each of these, really, you know. The sun, let's just see if I can't do that. The sun is exalted in Aries because the sun is the king of the chart, and the king does better when it is looking out for the country's interests and not for the interests of other countries and other people. That's what gives the nation an identity and allows the king to lead by what's best for the country, and therefore also the self to lead by what's best for the self. Moon in Taurus is exalted because in Taurus, the moon simply moves towards that and attracts that which is lovingly sustains itself and its relationships and its faith in itself and its good feelings by what things intrinsically are, by how people intrinsically are, by how its situations intrinsically are, and how they intrinsically are. Whereas when the moon is in Scorpio, it's debilitated because then the moon puts much effort in manipulation in trying to help the other person and trying to mold the other person psychically to go along with the desires and needs of the Scorpio without just simply, the moon in Scorpio has desires in a person for a type of person, an ideal, and they end up wasting a lot of energy trying to either mold themselves or the other person to do what the moon is supposed to do, which is to give an unconscious, unnatural sense of balance and harmony. Mars is exalted in Capricorn because it is Saturn reigns in the animal impulses of Mars. The influence of Saturn, of Capricorn on Mars, it reigns in the animal impulses, cause the person to be constantly pushed into efforts which express Mars, and it's pushed to express Mars on top of things through pressures and through collective social fields or competition or a skill or a strategy that other people are also in mutual competition with. And because of this, the Mars is objective to itself. It doesn't take it seriously, and it doesn't get emotional, reactive over the work that it does because it has always pushing its work outside of itself. And it learns to get its tension and stress energy out onto things that are outside of itself, disciplines outside of itself. Whereas Mars in Cancer, it takes upon itself at an emotional level It reacts emotionally to things. And that's why it never learns how to apply itself logically, because it's moved by its internal emotions. It doesn't learn the fortitude of expressing against its animal impulses and holding against its animal impulses, whereas Capricorn forces Mars to do that. It's my little spendthrift way of trying to explain. Mercury is exalted in Virgo because the mind does better, and it's in the Mercury, the mind, the intelligence does better through the intelligence, through calculated analytical ways of getting data objectively. When Mercury is in Pisces, the mind spends time feeling out the internal reactive mind, the internal reactive faith. It acts on an internal sense of faith and movement, which never builds on a constructive capacity to hold and manage information, because it doesn't compartmentalize information in any solid way, because it's always changing how it thinks about things. It always changes how it conceives of things. Mercury is actually just as mutable in Virgo, but it holds the information because it is objective, and it can deal based on information because it knows that its information is right. My girlfriend has Mercury in Virgo, and when she knows something's right, she can just confidently, without emotion, it's not like she's trying to, she's a girl, and she's got Mercury there in Virgo, and she just delivers information when she knows that it's contradictory to what I want to hear. And so there's no personality in it. She's just like, look, man, I understand what you're saying, but I'm trying to tell you for your sake so you can get over it that this is like this. And she holds that information there, and she insists on it until I can describe to her another reasoning for what I'm trying to do, and then she'll explain that information. Whereas the Mercury in Pisces is never sure, because it's not used to data being fixed in that way. Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer because it gains energy when it is acting from its own internal spirit, from its own internal movement, from the self. Whereas Jupiter is debilitated when it is in the world of Capricorn, when the world and business and competition outside of itself is putting pressure on it for the sake of gains and status that can vault the Jupiterian energy on top of others. Jupiter doesn't do that well when it's trying to be seen in the light of others. Although Jupiter's in Capricorn, it does good for whatever Capricorn represents, but it loses its energy because that's not how the self laughs at its own joyous expression. The self laughs at its own joyous expression when it's doing it for its own joys, for joy's own sake, and for the sake of the joy of others too. That's what gives Jupiter the luck and the power in Cancer. And it's hard to express that joy when you're just trying to have the luck of some kind of material enterprise or some kind of social status that you can get on top of, because that's not always solid. Whereas yourself, your eternal, unfolding, blissful moon soul self is always there, and Jupiter can always play on it. Venus is exalted in Pisces because the nature of love and relationship is to see the other person, is to be open to how the other person is. Whereas Venus is debilitated in Virgo because Venus in Virgo is being very critical and closing itself off through the mental realm of how they ought to relate with people. Whereas Venus is supposed to be serving. The Venus in Pisces automatically gains, this is how we got to think of exaltation, is that it gains power. And the power comes from a positive, just naturally, aesthetically harmonious placement. In the case of Pisces, Venus is just gaining the power to express what Venus is, which is service and love and passion and that sort of thing to people, because it is not being discerning. It is feeling the faith of open lovingness that it can connect to in anybody and everybody. So that was my little sort of breakdown spiel there. Now, as for Rahu and Ketu, Rahu and Ketu have no established constellation of exaltation and debilitation. The majority of Jyotishis agree that Rahu is exalted in Taurus and debilitated in Scorpio, and Ketu is exalted in Scorpio and debilitated in Taurus. I would even like to say that the majority of Jyotishis agree on that. I would disagree with that, actually. A small but significant group of Jyotishis take Gemini and Sagittarius to be exaltation and debilitation of Rahu, and Sagittarius and Gemini, respectively, to be the exaltation and debilitation of Ketu. A very, very small group considers Rahu and Ketu to be exalted in Scorpio, and both to be debilitated in Taurus. This approach seems to be verified both by experience and by the logic of the scheme of exaltation. I should say this whole thing with Rahu and Ketu, I've got Scorpio and Taurus in quotation marks because even in my reckoning, the other lessons that I've done with other teachers, I have found that this is not necessarily the case. I suddenly just want to check out my screen here. I just want to check out my sound here. Yeah, I'm good. So, in this scheme, the grahas form contrasting pairs: Sun and Saturn, Moon and Rahu Ketu, both nodes being the opposite ends of the same axis, Mercury and Venus, Mars and Jupiter. For each pair of planets, the exaltation constellation of the one becomes the debilitation constellation of the other, and vice versa. Interesting. Within this framework, it follows that the exaltation constellation of the moon should be the debilitation constellation of both Rahu and Ketu, and that the debilitation constellation of both Rahu and Ketu should be the exaltation of the moon. Sorry. That. But you see the point here. Throughout this book, it'll be assumed that Rahu and Ketu are both exalted in Scorpio and both debilitated in Taurus. Because if the moon and Rahu and Ketu are a pair in this way, then I hope you guys must be able to see what's going on here, right? Sun and Saturn are a pair because oh, I see what's going on here. I'm sorry, I kind of screwed this up. I don't know how I messed this up, but Saturn's sign is supposed to be Libra. Saturn is exalted in the sign of Libra, and it is debilitated in the sign of Aries. So that's why Sun and Saturn are considered a pair. It sucks that I screwed up my diagram here. Then we can see Mars and Jupiter are a pair because Mars is exalted in Capricorn, whereas Jupiter is debilitated in Capricorn, and vice versa. Mercury and Venus are a pair because it's Virgo and Pisces, Pisces and Virgo. And then the Moon and Ketu and Rahu would be a pair because the Moon is exalted in Taurus, debilitated in Scorpio. Therefore, Rahu and Ketu would be exalted in Scorpio and debilitated in Taurus. In any case, for me, it's that whole Rahu and Ketu exaltation point. It's kind of hearsay. A little bit of Jyotish, what would you call it? Jyotish gossip is the word I was trying to say, because no one is sure exactly what's final on that regard. But in any case, now our authors are going to describe a little bit about this exaltation. A planet placed in its exaltation degree, or, practically speaking, in any other degree of its constellation of exaltation, it attains its strongest placement in a horoscope, and so will exhibit its energies for good or ill with great intensity. Not necessarily for better, but it'll be involved with the opening of its energy. With Mars in Capricorn, it'll be conscripted to act because of the duties that it takes on. Venus in Pisces, it'll be conscripted to act because there's openness to how you would define love and pour your love and faithful service into people. Sun in Aries would be forced into project onto itself activities that are fiery and that bring out a sense of self-reliance, which can be powerfully projected into anything and is powerfully pulled into much activity. They are challenged and forced into some kind of activity that forces them to have lots of manic energy. And it's for better or worse whether that manic energy will be put to the proper use and constructive use. Exalted planets are not, however, and this is the key point that I just mentioned, they're not always benefic and good, benevolent planets. Whether or not a graha will give good results is determined by other indicators in the horoscope. An exalted graha acting malevolently will cause exalted problems in one's life, while a planet in its debilitation degree, or effectively in any other degree of its debilitation constellation, will express its energies very feebly because it has attained its weakest placement in a horoscope. It may well be desirable for one's prosperity to have certain planets debilitated or fallen in one's chart, though certain malefic grahas may actually become, for complex reasons, more maligned when fallen. It's kind of interesting, hard to talk and explain that, but I understand what they're getting at there. A Saturn in Aries is made weak by being in Aries, and it's a malefic, which means it might have less of its malefic capacities in aspect to another planet, for example. But ultimately, it's still definitely not being served by not having the energy to upkeep and fortify its responsibilities, no matter what it's aspecting. You're still going to be harmed, and things are going to be loose and ragged and sketchy and scattered if Saturn does not have a strong grip, an energy grip on things outside of itself that can support it, essentially, because Saturn's supposed to be exalted in Libra. When it's in Aries, it has less of a easy time finding that grip, and its energy just gets sloshed. But I digress. These are the main terms of how to discern the exaltation of a planet. Now stay tuned for the next episode. We're going to be talking about constellational rulership, which means what happens when a planet is in the sign of its own rulership, as well as what's something called the Mula Tricona, something we're going to be talking about in the next episode. For now, I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. Thanks for watching, folks. See you on the next one.